entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows. Available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys have enjoyed the show thus far. We now transition from QBs for a little bit to the wide receiver position, one of the most pivotal positions in a fantasy sport, because there's an obvious tier 1 and then there are some guys who at best are flyer options. So trying to make sense of the wide receiver market is going to be very difficult for some. But hopefully this segment helps you in that department, because most of these guys really have fascinating opportunities to grab hold of being good wide receivers in the system. And so, without further ado, let's jump into why these wide receivers can be highly coveted based off of their strength of schedule. Now, the wide receiver position, the reason why it's so tough is because as more and more wide receiver rooms get more and more crowded with talent, it's tough to find the balance that you want. And as someone who preaches balance in a fantasy football team, as someone who doesn't necessarily want a high-end guy who's going to get all your points, as someone who wants to find a guy who can mitigate for if your wide receiver one has a terrible day, it's always going to be about how you view A, wide receiver rooms, and B, the strength of the team itself. And so, kind of delineating which of these wide receivers can win in their strength of schedule could really help you decide which of these guys it can be taking should you want a more balanced team. We're starting off with a guy who's definitely the most experienced in his wide receiver room. We talked about his quarterback just a couple of minutes ago, and this guy will essentially be perhaps his top receiver due to his experience, but maybe because of other guys might not get as many opportunities as people think. And that is DJ Moore. He had the third best schedule for wide receivers, but that's the same case for both Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. If DJ Moore, really separates himself, then I'll be fine with him getting the lion's share of the targets, and saying that confidently. But right now, this wide receiver room really doesn't have a true number one yet. I kind of feel like it will come down to what Caleb Williams sees and what he feels comfortable with. Is it the guy who has most experience in this Bears system? Is it the guy who's a veteran in this league, has been one of the better wide receivers in the league for many years? Or is it the rookie who he's coming in with and has worked out with in the recent past who gets the most targets? And I think that the reason why DJ Moore is seen as the most advantageous out of all of them in the fantasy is because, well, he's the guy who's probably going to set the bar. I feel like while he's not necessarily going to be the wide receiver one, he's going to get the most touches in early downs to really get this offense going, because Caleb Williams, I feel like, will feel most confident going with someone who knows the early down plays the most. And as the game goes on, he gets more improvisational, and that's where Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze come in. So, the comfortability that lies in DJ Moore combined with that strength of schedule really makes him someone who can be intriguing. That being said, if you're catching passes on early downs, you might not be, in open space that often, or in the red zone that often for that matter. And so that's the only concern with Moore. Is his touchdown production going to go down? And if so, how will that affect his fantasy stats? But right now, I feel as if DJ Moore is going to be relied upon a lot to get Caleb Williams comfortable. And maybe that should just be enough for him to be coveted. Then we look at a wide receiver room that's definitely going to be very much by committee. Maybe not going to see as many touches as others on this list in Ladd McConkey and Joshua Palmer. They are top 10 in terms of schedule in weeks 1 through 4. They have the Raiders, Panthers, Steelers, and Chiefs in 15 through 17. They have the Bucs, Broncos, and Patriots. So as you can see, they have some nice little games early on in the season when you really want to solidify yourself in your fantasy football league, and later in the season when the playoffs come around. But the reason why I say they're not like more is because, well, who knows what Jim Harbaugh's philosophy and offense is going to be. Who knows if Ladd McConkey and Joshua Palmer are going to get touches and where on the field they're going to get them. I feel as if Jim Harbaugh's going to stick with the run game, stick with a solid offensive line, and really make Justin Herbert more of a timing-based quarterback. That doesn't necessarily really hurt the wide receivers as much as it might hurt Justin Herbert. But at the end of the day, this is not a wide receiver room I feel comfortable kind of vouching for in fantasy football. Their schedule can be as easy as can come, but it doesn't make sense in terms of what I feel like Jim Harbaugh is going with this offense. And so I feel like this room could have potential to grow if Jim Harbaugh relies upon them and they turn out to really help Justin Herbert feel more comfortable. But at the end of the day, Jim Harbaugh seems like he's headed in a different direction than pass-first philosophies. And then, of course, let's end with a wide receiver who has always had solid traits. We never had the consistent QB play to really have a breakout moment, and that is Drake London. We talked about the NFC South a lot on this show. We talked a lot about, how Drake London, if he gets a consistent quarterback, can really pop. He's had 1,000-yard seasons without, a solid QB. And for that matter, when I look about the NFC South, there's also an opportunity for Chris Olave because Derek Carr was on the biggest winners list for QBs. The NFC South is an AFC West and NFC East schedule. So the best teams you're playing are the Chiefs, Eagles, and Cowboys. That's only 3 teams that you're really worried about. The rest are winnable games. And so, I think about Drake London and think about how it's fit in this offense. If Kirk Cousins is just serviceable, Drake London can really pop. And then Chris Olave, on the other hand, is a guy who has always popped in this league, has not necessarily had, above average play because both Winston and Carr at his quarterback position have been below average in my humble opinion. And so, while I like the setup for them, it's all going to come down to how their quarterbacks play. I feel more confident in saying Chris Olave is a guy who I would immediately take because he's the center of the offense for the Saints and he's what really makes them tick, than Drake London, because I feel like should the Falcons really believe in Kirk Cousins to operate this offense to full effect, it's going to be a lot of touches to go around. You're going to have to incorporate Bijan. You're going to have to incorporate Algier even. You're going to have to incorporate Kyle Pitts. And so Drake London may not get as many touches as we think. He has a lot of hope and optimism surrounding him for what he's done without a competent QB. But right now, I would say out of all the NFC South receivers, let's kind of take away Mike Evans and Chris Godwin because we know how good they are. And Mike Evans will always be in the conversation to have 1,000-yard seasons up the wazoo, first ballot Hall of Famer. So let's focus on these two. Out of both of them, Chris Olave perhaps is the guy you should take because of the fact he's going to get a lot of touches and he is the bell cow for that wide receiver room for the Saints. When I look at this entire list, and I look at the receivers on, I see a lot of opportunity and I see a lot of wishful thinking. The opportunity that I see is with DJ Moore because he really has a chance in terms of experience, in terms of being comfortable in a setup to really pop. And ultimately, he's in a wide receiver room that I really think will elevate each other as the years go on. Then I look at McConkey and Palmer, and that's the wishful thinking side of things. There's a lot of ifs and buts and ands surrounding McConkey and Joshua Palmer that I just can't get past. I just can't see a clear path where McConkey and Joshua Palmer, even with this easy slate of games ahead of them, can really be focal points of this offense. I think it's going to be a running back focal offense. I think it's going to look very much like Jim Harbaugh in Michigan and how he utilized J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum. I think that it's no knock against their abilities as wide receivers. It's just that they find themselves in a position where they're not necessarily the most coveted position in the Chargers offense. And then with the NFC South guys, it's not necessarily wishful thinking because we know these guys are excellent. But it's certainly looking like the balance of both of these guys lies with one over the other because it's out of necessity that Chris Olave gets the most touches in that offense. And the Falcons' offense, at least on paper, is solid. And on the field, it'll probably be filled with question marks. And with question marks comes decisions about targets. And so I don't really know what Drake London is. But overall, this goes to show how volatile this wide receiver market is becoming. This goes to show how, as these teams get better, as they build on certain aspects that they want to, and how they focus on those aspects, how it becomes more difficult as someone who's playing fantasy football and looking for certain players to really find someone who you trust in a system that works for you. I preach balance. And out of all of these, I would say Moore and Chris Olave are going to be the guys who are balanced because they're guys who can really step in for your wide receiver one should they underperform. And so if you want balance like me, pick those two guys. But there are going to be moments where you're going to have to throw a dart at the dartboard and say, hey, I'm going to pick you up and see where the wind blows. Because the wide receiver market is not necessarily at its finest moment right now. But we're just about to do it for this segment. We are going to close the show with the biggest losers at the QB position. Guys who have definitely gone on the short end of the stick, but still talented guys nevertheless. We'll be right back after the break.